number one, I have to confess that I'm Austrian, so please, I have to apologize for my accent. Hasn't gone away in 10 years, won't go away anyway. I hate the Austrian weather, and that's why I moved to lovely Queensland 10 years ago. And I work for for Bond Uni, a slightly oddish place, which to some extent believes in open source, but only if it fits if it fits the buzzword bingo. Okay, so what do I do? Well, I pester students, I do a little bit of Debian work, and I worry about society and, well, democracy and the things that have happened in the last 10 or 11 or 12 years, so to speak, because it's not all as lovely and shiny and bright and beautiful as this place just outside of Bond campus. Right. Now, what's it all about? Online anonymity. I think we have a big problem which has become worse and worse and worse over the last 10 to 15 years, and that is mining data, collecting data hasn't just become possible, it has become feasible and commonplace. Just about everybody implicitly agrees to, having his or her data collected left, right, and center, and unfortunately, all this data, personal data that has been collected, can now be efficiently and conveniently mined for totally different purposes. And I believe this is wrong. I want to stay a very private person, and I believe that as open source developers, sysadmins, and so on, we have to counter that a little bit. It's cool to have shiny gadgets. It's lovely to have 20, 30, 40 social networking applications on your Android phone, but do we really want that always? Should we want that always? Should we agree to, say, having our car number plates collected everywhere on 5, 6, 7 different toll bridges, or just security cameras, as they call them, and then suddenly learn 3 years later that, wait a minute, we're no longer just looking for people driving with their one eye shut, but rather we're looking at criminals, and we're trying to track people where they're going. I think this is wrong. And I believe that we have to do something about it as developers, and we should do things about this as users. Right, and that's why I proposed this quickie talk, ideas about anonymity, what I believe we can do as users to fly under the radar a little bit. Using services that are semi-open, using products / technology which is open to scrutiny by everybody, which of course means open source technology primarily, using these things with a little bit of a paranoid mindset, I'm a paranoid and I'm okay, to stay as public as we want to be, rather than to have all our lives spread out in public, which I believe is not so cool an idea. Okay, now, number one disclaimer, Austrian and I'm nuts. Number two disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. A lot of the ideas that I suggest over the next 30, 40 minutes may be counter to your provider's terms of service or acceptable use policies. I'm not so sure about whether they're really illegal, but I definitely believe in civil disobedience, and I certainly believe that we shouldn't totally knuckle under, especially as the biggies, as all those guys collecting and siphoning data left, right, and center. Well, they don't believe in privacy legislation anyway. I mean, let's look at the Privacy Commission and what they've done. What they've done about Voodoo Phone, what they've done about the Street View, Google Street View issue with Google collecting MAC addresses and so on, and doing a little bit more. Oh, it was a mistake. We won't do it again. Yeah, thanks. Right. And then you have the commissioner saying, yeah, well, they broke the law, but that's it. We're not going to do anything about it. So I think we have to, be a little bit sneaky and nasty ourselves. Rightio. Now, I'm somehow occasionally mixing the terms privacy and anonymity a little bit. The two go together. I can't really avoid this. But the point is, I'm not primarily talking about privacy per se, but rather I'm talking about anonymity, because privacy in the commonly agreed sense would mean that, well, things can be known to others, things can be disclosed to others, but, well, we'll keep them somewhat private. And I think that's way too late. I think if your information is in the clutches of the big miners, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and friends, as soon as that has happened, it's too late. You have to rely on them doing the right thing, not being evil, in order to, well, not have your data disclosed to ASIO and friends. And I don't want to trust them. I don't think it's useful, and, well, I think it's actually wishful thinking to believe that they are trustworthy with my private data. Therefore, I believe that the only way to really counter this, to nip this in the bud before we end up in a lot of trouble with, well, petabyte or exabytes of historic data that will haunt us 30 years hence, I think in order to get that sorted out straight away, we need to keep our data from making it that far in the first place. So that's why the focus on anonymity, which often mightn't be really necessary. So this is certainly a little bit on the, well, going overboard side of things. Okay, certain facts which we can't really avoid. If we want to communicate, we're going to leave patterns. Fine. I mean, the act of communicating with somebody else is per se constitutes a pattern, and if this is observed by others, yeah, okay, well, that's it. Can't avoid this. The trouble with patterns, of course, is that certain patterns are distinctive. Certain patterns serve very nicely to uniquely identify you. I mean, every second, or look, lots of people looking at, I don't know, some news website is not very distinctive. I mean, if the news website is of any interest, lots of people will do it, fine. But how many of you phone a particular party at a particular time? How many people search for a specific search term in a particular context? Where do you go from a what, when, and where do you go? All of these can be collected and can be combined in order to get a fairly good profile of a particular specific person. So, what really can we do? What is left to users and to developers like us to do to minimize those patterns? What should we think about, or hopefully think about at least once or twice, before we make an educated decision about what we disclose and what we don't disclose? Now, the major aspects that I see for privacy online are getting general access to the communication means, to the communication medium, in an anonymous fashion, or at least pseudonymous fashion. And then on top of that, there's the issue of using particular services or particular applications in an anonymous fashion. Because you can have the best access to the internet, which is not traceable, can't be in any way attributed to you. Well, if you log in clear text at a particular site with some kind of identity that only you use ever, then, well, thank you very much. This is not exactly very anonymous. So you have to cover both bases, the lower level hardware, network access, as well as the way you drive your applications. Right. Okay, let's look at this from a slightly historic perspective. Now, phones. Phones, of course, were until recently the primary communication means. Recently, okay, yeah, 25 years ago. Let's put it that way. But phones can be anonymous or can be facilitators for anonymous communications if we look at things like public phone booths. Problem, of course, is that coin-operated payphones are a dying species. They're vanishing very, very quickly. and they're replaced by nothing. They're replaced by nothing as safe, from a paranoid's perspective, as public phone booths were. Fixed phones are, or landline phones, I mean, are most definitely not anonymous, and they certainly are in no way supposed to be, or can in no way be treated that way. Why? Well, okay, the subscriber, of course, is known. You've got to sign a contract to get this stuff. And what not so many people know is that over the last 6 or 7 years, a very nasty piece of legislation called the Kalia Act, which is American-based, but nevertheless has made its way in some disguises to Australia and other developed countries. Well, this particular act has led to all major telco providers to have to integrate lawful interception backdoors, I call them, lawful interception capabilities into all carrier-grade comms equipment. So that means all the big Cisco switches, that means anything that does voice over IP, and so on, and so on, and so on. And that's not exactly nice, especially as this is very quiet and shush, and I'm pretty sure it's got a lot of holes anyway. So a lot of people will see this information who shouldn't be accessing this stuff. Right, so real phones can't, I mean, they've gone the way of the dodo. Fine, we can live with that. We've got replacements. And we all carry our mobile phone leashes with us most of the time. So what about mobile phones and anonymity there? And I do know I lump together phone communications with online activities because, frankly, nowadays the distinction between the internet and some phone service is not that great anymore. Mobile phones, well, how about a couple of anonymity-related aspects of phones? Number one, well, who can have one? Fixed phones, we have a subscriber who's most definitely fixed and known to whoever provides the service. Mobile phones, well, prepaid SIMs exist. They are lovely, they're very nice, quite often they're also pretty cheap. Trouble, however, is in many countries we've seen one major erosion of privacy in this particular regard, and that is you've got to give out a lot of identifying information in order to get a mobile phone card. Why is that? I've got no idea. There's no real good reason. I mean, we still don't have to show any kind of ID when we send a postcard. Why the hell should I have to show my passport or driver's license just to get a mobile phone, just to get a SIM card? It just doesn't make sense. Some countries are a little bit less strict in that. Australia, unfortunately, doesn't belong to them. The Austrians, for example, are a little bit more, I don't know, lazy. And some of the vendors over there still, well, Aldi, for example, sells you internet or phones smack bang in the middle of the shops, and no IDs, no questions asked. Right, now that's the type of stuff that I like. However, if you look at mobile phone services and these ID checks, well, in my experience, the cheapest and chunkiest vendors, the online ones, the resellers of Vodafone or Telstra, some of them are super haphazard in how they do the identity checks. Right? So this is something that you certainly should remember, keep in mind, should you ever have the need for a phone that is not so straightforward to trace to you, at least initially, from a perspective of buying it. Then, of course, mobile phones themselves are, well, they are leashes, they are spyware devices. Every single mobile phone has a built-in IMEI, the International Mobile Equipment Identifier, as far as I remember. That thing is globally unique, sorta, kinda, and that thing is exchanged with your provider every single time you log on. So buying one shiny new, I don't know, HTC phone, keeping it for the next 3 years, and switching out SIMs is not going to help you to stay a private person. It's not going to help. And of course, by default, all current mobile technology, by necessity, has the capability of triangulation, has the capability of determining or telling the service provider where you are roughly, at least within a couple of 100 meters, and over the last 4 or 5 years, most phones have sprouted GPS chips too, and a good number of them do phone home. I mean, Apple has been in hot water for having their phones phone home with the GPS coordinates. Google, there were allegations about that. I don't know about it, whether it actually happened or not, but the likelihood is quite high, I would say. Okay, so mobile phones are not that cool either. Fortunately, we have this internet thingy too. And the internet nowadays can very much provide us with all the goodies that we need, even if we are Luddites and paranoiacs and, well, conspiracy believers, conspiracy theorists, or not. Or even if we simply want to host a WikiLeaks mirror without getting into hot water. Right here, so internet access and anonymity. What can we do? What kind of options do we have there? And what kind of pitfalls are there? Well, fixed internet access obviously is, we don't have to say a word about this. By itself, any kind of DSL access or the like is in no way anonymous, and we certainly would have to use anonymization services on top of our normal internet access to stay hidden in the shadows. That fortunately is possible. Mobile and wireless internet doesn't, well, seems to be more convenience, or seem to be a slightly more convenient solution to getting access altogether, but well, while the mobiles themselves, while the broadband modems are fairly cheap, the trouble is still this is basically data-only mobile phone setup, which again means some countries have identity requirements for even signing up. So we don't gain too much here either, and we lose a little because, well, our location is again is known to the provider and could be transmitted to others. So, what else is there? Well, I found out, to my surprise, this wasn't really, or I didn't see this heavily advertised. I found out that the most horrible provider of junk food also provides relatively decent free Wi-Fi all over the country. The couple of shops that I tried in Queensland, well, they didn't even have any major restrictions access-wise. No portals, no nothing, no yes, I sign away my life terms of service. Connect DHCP, you have internet. That's quite nice. And that's certainly not just done by the market leader in obesity, but also by other parties, like the Queensland courts. I haven't checked for other states, but I reviewed this briefly and I saw that all Queensland courts nowadays offer complimentary free Wi-Fi across the court area. Don't know how far it reaches. Unfortunately, don't have to go to court, so it's at least an option. And Queensland Rail has touted heavily that they should have by now rolled out Wi-Fi across most of Southeast Queensland's rail services. And it's going on and on and on. There's more and more providers who serve complementary wireless access, a complementary internet access as, well, as a goodie, aside of their main business. Which of course is very, very nice if you want to be anonymous. And unfortunately, if you want to stay anonymous, or if you want to stay very, very quiet and under the radar, you will have to go through some hoops. It is not, by any means of imagination, a straightforward operation to vanish online. You will not achieve this just by ticking one button in your Firefox or Internet Explorer. It doesn't happen. You would have to change your habits quite a bit. Rightio. Alternatives, of course, alternatives to hotspot internet of that sort. I've seen quite a few of the larger shopping centers also have coin-operated, unattended net kiosks and the like. Should I need to send some threatening letter anywhere, I will certainly use a service like this. Rightio. What people forget, unfortunately, and which will bite them over the next 2 years when IPv6 finally becomes reality, is that it's not just the type of your internet access or where you access the internet, which may identify you pretty heavily. No, it's also the network gear itself, which can leak your identity quite drastically. Every Ethernet device out there has a MAC address, media access control access, which is generally burnt into some kind of EEPROM, which is sort of kind of fairly unique, which is 6 byte in size, so there's some space in it. Not all of it is available to identify a particular card, but the nasties about this is that A, it's true for Wi-Fi gear. All wireless equipment has a MAC address. They're Ethernets on steroid. That's one thing. B, Google collected these during the Street View mess. And C, while with the current IP version 4, the MAC address is not of importance beyond the local area network, with IP version 6, depending on how you set up your shiny new IPv6 subnet, your MAC address can very easily become part of your public IP version 6 address. So suddenly, even if you move around between campuses, between here and there, use different internet access mechanisms, you may very well have your permanent, unique IP address for your device, bound to your device. And that's not exactly great if you're paranoid. So, as a consequence, I would highly recommend that you change your MAC address every now and then. And changing the MAC address doesn't work permanently because, well, it's burned into some silicon somewhere. But just about all decent operating systems out there support a soft change, as in change the MAC address for the lifetime of as long as the machine is up. The next time you reboot it, of course, this is gone, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to automate this. I mean, in Debian, this is just an ifconfig statement. In any kind of Unix, it's an ifconfig statement, and that's it. And as long as you make your MAC address not clash with anybody in your vicinity, you're golden. Okay. Right. So far, I've painted a relatively bleak, boring picture. The mechanisms that we use to access networks or communication media, unfortunately, are not very anonymous. I believe that it's necessary for a healthy society to have the electronic equivalent of an untraceable postcard, but we have gone beyond that quite a bit. Right now, just about every single step we take is somehow collectible, is somehow data mineable, and will help interested parties in getting a fairly decent profile of ourselves. And we shouldn't let that happen. So, what can we do? Well, we can use a bunch of network anonymization services, which is not a new idea. This idea has been around a long time. The oldest system that was semi-widespread in its deployment was a system called Mixmaster, with a successor called Mixminion, which was meant for doing email anonymous remailers. Right, now we all know why that may not really be a good idea in this century anymore. And as a matter of fact, the anonymous remailers are pretty much dead, extinct. Why? Because it's really hard at the best of times to distinguish between spam and real communication, and running your email through 3 or 4 or 5 anonymizing relays doesn't help matters any. So people don't really bother with this anymore. But this idea dates back to the early 80s. So this is not new by any means. Right. So even if our internet access or our net access by itself is not anonymous, doesn't help us stay covered, well, we can build and others can use anonymizing services, which the best known one of which is actually free and open source software, which has been scrutinized heavily. Just about every conspiracy theorist out there has claimed over the last couple of years that, oh, there's a big hole, there's a big nasty behind these people running Tor, and there must be all kinds of, I don't know, evil empires lurking behind the scenes. But so far, it seems that the specifications and the protocols and implementations are clean enough to make this a useful. Right. So, anonymizing infrastructure. Well, what's out there? In some way, any kind of anonymization service, what can it do? It can hide you amongst many. That's all that's possible. Whether you leave other distinctive patterns by doing particular types of communications, that's a separate story. But at the very least, your network identity can be hidden, can be replaced by one of a number of identities of the parties providing the anonymization service. And there have been a few attempts of creating commercial anonymizers. And to the best of my knowledge, so far, all of them have failed miserably after a couple of years because, well, people started thinking about trust here and started thinking about how does it work and who's actually running this and is it really safe? Are they controlled by the NSA or ACO or whoever? Or are they just after some money? Or what is it? And luckily in this area, open source has won again, and there's a good number of decent academic publications, for example, analyzing the Tor network and its possible vulnerabilities and its benefits. So, Tor, what's it all about? What does it do? Why should you think about maybe using it or contributing to it? Tor is short for the onion router, which is a relatively simple piece of software, a proxy, so to speak, a TCP proxy, which happens to talk to many other Tor nodes, if you let it, and which will then decide where to send your requests. Rather than send your requests straight across the internet, identifying you in that communication, when you use Tor, what happens is that your TCP packets are encrypted a number of times. That's where the onion comes, or where the name onion comes from. So your Tor client decides what other relays to use. Middlemen. How many middlemen to use, and which ones. From a number of, from basically all the currently available Tor relays, it will then create a virtual circuit, so to speak, and your packet will be wrapped multiple times. It will be wrapped in public key encryption for, the last node, for the second to last node, for the third last node, and so on, until you end up with a big fat onion, which of course wastes some space and wastes some time, which you can hand to the first node. And the cool thing about anonymizing services like Tor, or onion routing in general, is that each and every node, each and every one of those middlemen knows only the node before and knows only the node afterwards. So if you have a chain which spans 3 or 4 or 5 different nodes, your packet will certainly travel, or your communication stream will travel along a path where none of the middlemen know who you are, and none of the middlemen know where the data is going in the end. And that, of course, is the important characteristic. You don't want any of the parties to be able to unravel that maze. And the cool thing about Tor and similar systems, there are some out there, this is just the most widespread one, is that they are relatively efficient. With common current hardware, browsing the web over Tor is not extremely painful. One thing you can't do with Tor at the moment is run voice over IP over it. Why? Well, latency. Again, this is just not doable. But anything that doesn't really require real-time access works just fine over Tor. Running SSH over Tor is not a biggie. I do this every couple of days just for the fun of it. Yeah, okay, right. Now, the really important thing about Tor is that the source is open. And the second important thing about Tor is it's a piece of software and a piece of infrastructure, I should say, which absolutely requires, or which will live or die, depending on how many people contribute back. Why? If I have 20 Tor nodes all over the planet, then some adversary will only have to subvert 10, 15 of those, or control the traffic that they generate in order to do traffic analysis and unravel all this lovely onion. If, on the other hand, I have 3, 4, or 5,000 nodes, then this hopefully borders the realm of impossible. Right? It's certainly infeasible at the moment. Hopefully it's as close to impossible as, well, as we can get it. The more the participants in Tor, the better, or to the Tor project, the better. And this is certainly an opportunity for contributing a little bit of bandwidth, should you have a static IP floating around somewhere. And I'm not a lawyer, but running a Tor node, running one type of Tor node, is not exactly a great exposure. Running a relay node, one of those middlemen, is not a biggie. Why? Well, you're not accessing child porn. You're not facilitating access to child porn. You're just shuffling packets which you don't know for other parties. Now that's about as much as Telstra or anybody else does. And it's even, you don't know what's in those packets because they are encrypted anyway. Right? At least that has been the successful defense for, well, just about all the Tor parties who have had trouble with the law over the last 6 or 7 or 8 years, which happens to be not that many. The Tor project website states a bit of statistics about that, and that it seems that really there has not been any successful litigation or any other kind of legal trouble that affected any kind of relay node. Now, one thing that's not for the faint of heart, should you really believe in anonymity and helping others achieve anonymity, is running an exit node. As in one of those last gateways towards a service that somebody wants to access. Because that's when you stick your neck out. Right? Because suddenly you've got a packet of data that goes to some kind of, I don't know where site, and it's coming from your IP addresses. And I've had some trouble in that regard already. And it takes a fair amount of, I don't know, convincing to tell some law enforcement officer that no, you don't collect any logs because the software doesn't do it anyway, or does make it very hard to collect logs. And no, I don't know where it came from. And no, there's no authentication or access control anyway. Right. Well, it led to my parents losing a couple of computers, but so be it. I've wisened up since then. Virtual private servers, cheap ones, are really good for that. Why? Because you can throw them away. Worst case. Okay. Tor has been around a fair while, and I believe at the moment it's the most promising tool to sanitize the network side of communications, should you want to stay private. We don't have anything for voice comms just yet, but with ZRTP and secure SIP and SIPWitch and friends, that may actually happen in the near future. We'll see. One of the coolest things about Tor is just a byline, is its provenance. The interesting thing about Tor is that it was developed by the US Naval Research Labs, which don't really have a reputation for coolness from the perspective of software development, especially not a reputation for doing, I don't know, really security or privacy relevant stuff, but they did a good job there. And after a couple of years, the EFF, the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, took over, and eventually the Tor project became a non-profit organization chartered somewhere in the US. And they thrive. I mean, at the moment, I think yesterday I checked, we've got about just between 2,500 and 3,000 relays running at any given time. And this has been extremely useful during, well, the last 2 years of revolutions all over the planet, because a lot of stuff in Syria, in Egypt, and so on, a lot of stuff in China especially, has traveled out of those slightly restrictive networks across Tor links. And that's a cool thing. That's, yeah, warm and fuzzy feelings, even if you're not really paranoid. So, it is possible to some extent, and with a little bit of care, and with a little bit of help from others, contributing back to some anonymization service to safeguard network level accesses quite well, quite nicely. But what about application level stuff? I mean, if I use a particular service where only I have the account to a particular login, it's all lost. I mean, I'm leaving a pattern that's extremely distinctive. I need to look at the applications as well. And I need to avoid applications and services which force me to leave my details for every single request. Flash cookies, local shared objects, HTML5, local storage, all of the above are lovely topics in that particular context. Why? Because they are very new, not exact, or the concepts have not really made it into Joe average user's mind just yet, and many of the browsers don't really have the proper controls to disable certain of those capabilities just yet. And just like always, since somebody decided to come up with JavaScript and embed it in web pages, every time since then, we've actually had the web not just being the killer application for the internet, but rather also the killer application for any kind of anonymity, unfortunately. And your web browser at the moment is your worst enemy, very simply put. And people who believe in Web 2.0 and JAX and JavaScript and Flash everywhere, well, they're second in the long line of people to put against the wall when the revolution comes. So web browsers, love them or hate them, we can't really do without them, right? And while I would really love to, do the equivalent of the online equivalent, or be the online equivalent of the Amish, as in not do anything that I don't like and live that way, I can't do that either. I mean, Luddite is okay, but to a certain extent we have to be practical. The trouble with web browsers is that in order to do all these goody things, these cool things like Google Maps and Friends, you have to have a fairly substantial code base. So no web browser worth its name, which is user-friendly and usable, is actually small enough to be sure, for you to be sure that it doesn't do all kinds of stupid things in the background. So I'd love to use Dillo every single day. It's just so extremely bad to use or hard to use that it just doesn't make sense. I'd love to use W3M more in my Emacs window because I have it running all the time anyway, but many of the services that I need daily just don't work. So I think this is the spot, or web browsing of modern client sites is the spot where you will have to make the most of your inevitable compromises from the perspective of anonymity. So JavaScript, well, I disable it 99% of the time, with the exception of about 20 different sites which I have to visit. Right? I am a Luddite. I don't go there. I don't have Flash on my boxes because I don't trust Adobe. I don't trust any of those guys. On the other hand, of course, I also don't have access to Facebook or to Google Maps or to Google anything but the search page. And it's you as the user who will have to decide whether this is way beyond acceptable in order to attain a goal which you may believe is not necessary, or whether this is totally fine. Now, personally, I believe that using a tool like NoScript, which gives you some relatively fine-grained control over where to use JavaScript and allow it or not, is the way to go. You won't be able to disable this capability all over the place. You won't be able to surf the web without cookies nowadays, much as I would like to. However, cookies are not the only thing that identifies you very nicely. Anybody know about e-tags? Well, they are meant to make it easy to cache. They're meant to make it easy to determine whether a source, whether a piece of data that traveled over the web has already been downloaded. It's actually MD5 sum or something similar of the data that you download. Your browser is supposed to remember the e-tag, send it to the server, and the server will then tell you, no, it hasn't been modified. Lovely, yeah? Over the last 2 or 3 years, it has become apparent that a number of the statistics and ad-click companies actually serve you customized e-tags. So every single request gets a different e-tag, regardless of whether the resource has changed or not. Hey, that's cookies. That's cookies in disguise. and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So yes, e-tags are cool, capabilities are cool, Twitter might be lovely, and Facebook, for those who believe in social networks, might be a cool toy, but they cost. And the complexity that many of those gadgets introduce, well, this complexity happens to have a number of nasty side effects from a privacy perspective. So NoScript certainly is something that you should investigate if you use Firefox. Well, if you use the Internet Explorer, my condolences, and Chrome, sorry, I don't trust Google. They are too big. Very simply. We've replaced one nasty empire, the MS one, with yet another empire which claims not to do evil. I'm sorry, but I don't believe this claim anymore. Right, so right now for me this means Firefox, which again is a bit hard to drive because it's huge and it's messy, and the developers have made some interesting choices every now and then. Adblock Plus can help you to get some crap out of your browsing experience. Permit cookies is a lovely tiny piece of software which lets you select with one click that yes, this particular site is allowed to do cookies, nobody else. So you can stay with the default and only enable cookies where you absolutely have to. Which of course is painful because first you hit a website which doesn't work, but at the very least you don't collect gazillions of third-party cookies which leave a big fat trail. And ref control is one of my other favorites, which lets you control very quickly whether the referrer header should be sent or should be mangled, as in faked, to claim that you're actually coming from the top level of that particular website. Because, let's face it, a lot of websites out there do referrer checking and let you add the goodies only if you come from their main pages. Right, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have the referrer header. Fortunately for us, there are some nice helpers to kill this. And generally, if you run Firefox, I would highly recommend that you toss just about all of .mozilla every now and then, with the exception of user.js and your extensions. Why? Well, because Firefox collects a lot of data in a lot of nice SQLite databases. Places, history, search recommendations, and so on and so on and so on. I'm electric, apparently. Or at least I'm confusing the amplifier. So, on the browser side, we are slightly stuck with huge tools because the web has become a complicated environment and we need the capabilities of the tools. And the tools are not 100% trustworthy anymore. On the searching side, I believe variety is the key, and it's not just Google, which you should visit, but also parties like DuckDuckGo, which can be accessed via Tor, Twingin, which provides a front end to Yahoo and Bing nowadays, IXQuick and others who officially claim at the very least not to record your IP addresses, which on the other hand have a little bit of ads to support their business model, and a few smaller others. Yes, Google is out there and they will stay the dominant search engine for a while, I'm pretty sure of that, but, well, we shouldn't just knuckle under. What else do we do with the web, or with the internet, sorry, I should say, which is of importance nowadays? Well, to me that would be email, but not just email. Instant messaging and chat and the like are services which have become mainstream, have become pretty cool and useful, and if you don't exactly use Skype or some other slightly nasty closedware, can be really, really nice and still anonymous or anonymity-friendly services. Naturally, trying to stay anonymous with IM is a little bit harder because just about all of the large providers require that you log in with them, that you establish an identity, and that usually needs an email address. More about email or anonymous email operations later on. So forget about getting a Hotmail account without leaving some trail and without identifying yourself every single time when you use the service. I found one nice alternative to that, semi-workable, so you won't be able to chat with Facebook, but that's Facebook users, but that's more an oversight on the Facebook admin side. and that is Jabber or XMPP. The XMPP protocol happens to include provisions for creating accounts on the fly. And while Jabber.org and some other large Jabber nodes have disabled this, very simply because, well, it led to some abuse, a lot of others haven't. So, for example, Jabber80.com, which do a very, very nice HTTPS gateway into the Jabber XMPP universe, simply let you create an account on the go within your Pigeon or whatever kind of client. No email address, no verification, no nothing. So, combine that with an anonymous network access with low-level privacy protection, and yeah, Bob's your uncle. You're very, very well set. And the cool thing about XMPP, it's federated. Every single node is supposed by design to be able to talk to every other XMPP node and forward stuff. So this is like email in the olden days where we had relays which handed stuff over to others. Well, XMPP is a lovely example of nice, decent protocol design, at least in that regard. And what about email? What about email? Let's face it, even if we can web browse, consume stuff, still, quite often we need some kind of email identity or access to email on the reading side, or possibly even we have to write some email, lo and behold. It's not always SMSs and Skype messages and the like. Now, for receiving email anonymously, we've got a bunch of options. Of course, there's numerous large free mail providers out there. We know them all. Well, we know a few of them. Many of them are quite all right, but most of them require you to somehow prove an existence, prove your humanity, prove your human nature, or they might even require that you have some kind of master email address to give you an account in the first place. Okay, so be it. There's a couple of alternatives, a couple of ways around it, but they're a little bit painful because you got to bootstrap yourself using one of the privacy or anonymity-friendly fellas out there. ZipImail and Hashmail, for example, provide full-blown webmail environments for anybody, just about any taker. I mean, they're size limited, but they don't require any kind of convoluted login sequence, or sign-up procedure, I should say, which requires you to, I don't know, sign away your life. But naturally, you still have to log in. And if you avoid logging in anywhere, then I highly recommend you a gang called trashmail.com. Watch it, the hyphen is important. There's another gang called trash-mail.com who do something totally different. The trashmail.com gang are a bunch of Germans who accept email and present it on the web for the next 6 hours for any address at trashmail.com. So, no login, no authentication, no nothing. Everybody can see it. And this is the perfect thing to enter into, say, a Hotmail account form or some kind of website form where they want an email address, they want to provide me with a sign-up confirmation email, and I don't want to give them anything that's real, any real email address. I just want to see this for the next 5 hours, then I can trash it, throw it away. That works very, very nicely, but you could simulate something like that with Hashmail just about as well. Right, and sending email, how do I get email out without leaving a trail? How do I become a nice whistleblower? Well, number one tool, naturally again, Tor, because SMTP is yet another TCP stream. It's not really too hard to send an email without presenting your IP address everywhere. Let's put it that way. One of the things we've got to be careful about, though, is that Tor exit nodes, many of them, don't let you talk to port 25 straight away. Why? Well, the Tor guys believe in being part of the solution, not part of the problem, and the problem in this case would be spam. So if you let people anonymously spam high volume, if you made this super easy, then you would be doing evil. That's why many Tor exit nodes have a policy that says, yeah, well, you can access stuff on other ports, but SMTP itself is, well, the potential for mischief is way too big for that, so you may not be able to do that. Alternatives? Webmail services. I mean, Hashmail works very, very nicely and doesn't really provide any kind of trouble, and they're free anyway. The basic offerings of all of the above are free and no big deal. Alternative, of course, alternatives, oopsie, I mixed up 2 slides. This one should actually go down the bottom. Alternative is you run your own stuff, host your own mail stuff. Nobody says that you actually have to be a large-scale ISP to run an email server. It's not that hard. It's not rocket science. And you don't even have to pay anybody any kind of DNS registration fee, because there's a number of free DNS providers like the Afraid.org gang who give you names from within hundreds of donated domains. And that works very, very nicely. So dynamic DNS plus free DNS together, well, lets you become temporarily or permanently somebody who can accept email. Run your own email, thank you very much. You have your own shadow, well, communication network, so to speak. Or, coolest but less practical thingy, I love the idea, is PGPboard. PGPboard.com is an organization who run the electronic equivalent of personal ads nowadays. It's just a message board which was hosted variably on Yahoo Groups and other providers, which does nothing but accept PGP encrypted email and display them. So you post your ad, so to speak, for everybody to see. Because lots of people follow PGPboard, lots of people will download this thing, not being able to actually access it because it's encrypted for a particular person, hopefully. But the one who actually reads it and who really can do anything with it, the one who's the intended recipient, will not be the only one downloading this damn thing. So one less pattern. Ad in the New York Times. Well,